Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Kate Drabinski with Ideas on Fire, and welcome to today's webinar on managing the end of term crunch with energy to spare, which I know we're all facing right now. I'm definitely in the crunch. So the way today's webinar will work is in a second, I will disappear from the screen and pull up our slides for today, and then we'll work through them. If you have questions or ideas or things you want to chat about, you can go ahead and type them in this box on the side of your screen, and we can discuss them when I return. So now I'm going to go ahead and pull up the PowerPoint, and we will talk about how to get through these next couple of weeks. All right, so I'm going to pull up our PowerPoint today, and again, this is managing the end of term crunch with energy to spare. And again, it is a rough time of year. So thanks for taking a few minutes out of your day to chat with us about this topic. So on tap, we're going to first talk about why it feels so bad here at the end of the term. And then I'm going to have some suggestions for managing some of the core or sort of the core tasks that we have as professors here at the end of the term. I'm actually going to start, though, by talking about course design suggestions for next time. I find that planning for this end of term crunch is really, really helpful, and you can work it into your syllabus. Also give you some advice about grading and grading that will take that will help take the burden down a little bit. At the end of the semester, there's often a lot of grading, but it's in some ways the easiest grading because a lot of the learning is done and you don't have to give the same kind of feedback. So we'll talk about that. Then I'll talk a bit about managing service loads at this time of year. And then, surprisingly, talk a bit about research and writing. This is often the first thing to go when we're busy. And I'm going to make the argument today that it should be the last thing to go. And then we'll end with a discussion of different self-care ideas. And for the resources slide, we have a bunch of ideas for sort of taking care of yourself in the midst of this crunch. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, so the problem with the end of the term is that everything is due all at once, and when we have the least energy to do anything at all. This, I think, is especially true this year because the Thanksgiving break was so late, and I think we didn't all necessarily plan well for how it would feel when we came back. There's a ton to do in the next week and a half, and that's really rough. But I think it matters how we deal with these next couple of weeks because it shapes what our winter break will look like. For a lot of us, that winter break is abbreviated because we're teaching a winter session course or we're traveling a bunch, but we have to plan for conferences in January or things like that. Or we need to set ourselves up to actually have a genuinely relaxing break. I'm definitely in favor of taking breaks when we've got them. So how we manage these next couple of weeks will set us up for the kind of winter break that we want to have. And this is the time of year where it can feel kind of hopeless. So I want to point out that it is not. There are lots of strategies for managing this crunch with energy to spare. And just to keep this in mind as we talk through the slides today, my number one tip is to remember that you don't have to get an A in everything, and it's important to let some things fall off your plate. Proponent of not doing everything well, so which is hard for a lot of us because the reason that we made it this far is because we're really, really good at this. But it's time to learn how to be less good at some of it so that we can take care of what we need to take care of for ourselves. All right, so I'm going to back up and give you some suggestions for things that you maybe should have done in the past that would help you out today. So the end of the semester is rough for everybody, and it's rough for students, and it's rough for us as professors. When you're working on your syllabus, keep that in mind at the beginning that the last couple of weeks are going to suck. And here's some ideas for ways of making it suck less for you as a teacher. First, plan group work for the end of this semester. If you incorporate group projects, you can do presentations at the end of the semester. And this is really refreshing for you as a teacher because you don't have to do the same kind of class prep, but it's also helpful for students who get a break from having to participate heavily, right? They can sit back and learn from their peers and listen, and each of them is only going to have to be up there for about 10 minutes. So right now, I'm teaching 3 classes, and all 3 are doing group presentations, and they've been doing research all semester. They've gotten lots of in-class time to organize their presentations, and now we just get to sit back and listen. And it makes for sort of relaxing last week, and it takes some of the work off your plate. So it can feel like you're getting away with something, but I would argue it's pedagogically sound to get them to do this kind of work together and to give them some practice presenting in front of each other. So plan this up front. I've been doing this for years, and it's made everything better for all of us at the end of the term. My second tip is if you notice that the students are really burnt out, and so are you, it's fine to devote days to writing and working on the end of the semester projects. These days are incredibly helpful for students, and it took me a long time to feel okay with giving this time to in-class writing, but I've found that it's actually really, really helpful. So one suggestion is to go ahead and cancel that extra content at the end and give it a day to actually sit together and write. And then your job as the professor is to sort of sit at the front and answer questions as they come up for students, look at first paragraphs, help students with thesis statements, all the stuff you do in office hours, the office hours that most students don't attend. This gives them time to work when they're overwhelmed with work, and it gives you some space from having to prepare another lecture. So these days can be really useful. Next, I know it sounds eeks, but movie days. The end of the semester is a great time to show a film. It is pedagogically sound. Students learn really well from films. A lot of students learn better from films than they learn from class discussion. It makes sense to give students a variety of ways of learning, and films are a great way that a lot of students learn. So go ahead and schedule those for the end of the semester, and meet your students where they are, and also yourself where you are. It will free up some of your mental space to not have to prep for class. And then finally, if you've got research projects or anything, it's sometimes okay to just cancel class so students can work on their projects, and not even make it a day where you're going to sit at the front of the room and answer questions, but just make it a day, go do your work how you want to. If it's really important to keep students accountable to this, you can have them upload to your whatever your learning management system is, some kind of account of what they did. But I don't suggest that. I suggest actually just making a day or two near the end of the semester for students to work on projects. You can stay in your office and work on your stuff. If they have questions or concerns, they can come see you there. Designing for this end of the semester where it's not just you, but the students too are completely done, I think eases some of the pressure for everybody. So it's not too late to cancel that last content day and do in-class writing, or surprise them with a movie. These things are, I think, really helpful. And I often have worried that I'd be cheating students out of learning if I did things like this, but it turns out that they're done learning new content at this point in the term, and it actually makes more sense to give them time to digest what they've learned and to synthesize that. So those are some suggestions to make your everyday teaching work, I think, a little bit easier. All right, so no matter what you do, you've got a ton of grading coming in here at the end. A lot of us have assignments due at the last day of class, and then we've also got finals. So for me, I actually have 3 sets of grades to do for each of my classes. They've got group research presentations, they've got their final unit papers, and then they have a final reflection I ask them to do. So I'm looking at, I have over 100 students, so I'm looking at over 300 individual pieces of things to evaluate. So I've got a few tips, and my first one is to think about, what do you want students to take with them from your course? What are some of the core things? Because if you think about what you remember from college, it's likely not individual readings, except for that like one reading that really changed your life. It's usually a skill set or a way of thinking or a methodological approach. So think about what you want them to learn and take with them through the rest of the class and make that the focus of your feedback here in the last days. Because that's the kind of feedback that's going to be helpful. But also remember that at the end of the semester, at this point, all learning has been done. It's complete. Whatever feedback you give now isn't going to change how they do in the course. And for a lot of them, they're not even going to look at that feedback. So keep that in mind when you do your grading. Again, meet them where they are. Be real about this. One tip that I have, if you're teaching an upper division class, for example, that has a big final essay, I learned this from my graduate school professors who would not give extensive comments unless it was specifically requested. So one idea is to ask students to, if they like extensive feedback, to include their address, and you will give extensive feedback and mail the paper to them. Or say, if you would like extensive feedback, please pick up your paper from office hours next semester. And that'll help you see, and let me know if you're going to stop by. And that'll help you see who really wants feedback so you can give it to them. If students aren't going to integrate it or respond to it, then it's not really worth your time to give it necessarily, right? So you're shouting into the void. So we want to decrease that. So those are a couple of tips and a global way to think about grading here at the end of the term. I assume that most students do not look at feedback from their final papers because they are not going to improve anything in my particular course. And this has been true for the vast majority of students I've taught in the last 15 years. All right, if you are giving feedback on written work, I have a couple of sort of main tips that will, I think, ease that grading burden. The first one is to give global feedback. A lot of us are used to grading written assignments where we are leaving comments on every few sentences, right? Or we'll do a really close reading of the first page and give a lot of intricate feedback. It turns out if you read the research by composition professors, that kind of feedback is of minimal use to students. It's overwhelming to them, and it's not actually helpful. And it's better to take a step back and think globally about the paper. If you want to give sort of line edits in terms of grammar and spelling or something, or there's persistent errors, mark those errors the first couple of times and then say these continue throughout. You don't need to mark each one. They're not going to go through and look at each one, right? So if you can give them just a little frame of line editing, if that's important to you and you're teaching, give it briefly on the first page or so, but then stop. What's more useful is to give students no more than 2 or maybe stretching it 3 main things to think about when they work on their next paper. So, and these things will be recurrent. The same issues will come up for students over and over again. So, for example, I always start with a positive note, like this is a really good start and you've got a lot of good ideas. This paper would improve with attention to how you use evidence to support your points and organization that will be helped along by a clear thesis statement. So things like that, just 1 or 2 things that to work on, to think about to help strengthen their persuasive or argumentative writing. That's all students can really do at once, and it keeps them from being overwhelmed with feedback. Now, this is all assuming you give feedback at all. On the last paper, you might decide not to give extensive feedback, but if you do, global feedback is generally more useful to students than the kind of line by line feedback that a lot of us are used to giving. My second tip is to use rubrics. And I think for a lot of us who are in the humanities and social sciences and sort of social justice minded, the idea of using quantitative scores on something as qualitative as a written assignment can be really off-putting. I'm here to make the case for rubrics as a thing that helps you save time. You have to set them up in advance, which is a decent amount of work. But once you've got them set up in your learning management system, you can transfer them semester by semester. And if you're using Blackboard, for example, they've got preformed rubrics that you can go in and edit for the things that you're looking for specifically. So if you're not using rubrics now, it might be too late for this time in the semester, but looking forward, it's really worth your time. It speeds up your grading and it gives students really quick feedback that they can easily digest. So my rubrics are usually uh, you know, excellent fair needs work, excellent good needs work or something like that on things like thesis statement, uh, use of evidence, grammar and punctuation and spelling and stuff like that, right? So I'll have like a few different things, and then I'm just clicking. At the end of the semester, I tend to only use the rubrics and skip the global feedback because I know that they won't be looking at that the same way they're looking at rubrics for really quick information on how they did. So those are my two sort of basic tips if you're grading writing assignments here at the end. A lot of us have at least 100 students at a time, and if you spend 10 minutes per paper, I mean, you do the math, it's just overwhelming, and it's not always the best use of your time. So these strategies, I think, will speed that up a bit. Now let's talk about service. A lot of times people have a ton of stuff they want done. Excuse me, I dropped my computer cord. People, especially administrators and chairs who might not necessarily have the teaching load that a lot of us have, will have a lot of things that need to be done right now, especially at the end. You're also invited, if you're like me, you're invited to a lot of departmental or college-wide holiday parties and events, and meet and greets and things like that. And it's the time of year when I have the least amount of time for that stuff. So in terms of managing service loads, I would suggest first thinking about what's actually essential to complete before everybody closes the door on the semester. And then ask your colleagues what can wait. A lot of things can actually wait until next semester, and working on them right now in a rushed way isn't going to help. So that's a point you can make to your colleagues on committees, right? See if you can move that meeting to next semester. Also, consider moving meetings online when possible. For a lot of us, the transportation to and from our workplace is itself incredibly time consuming. And if we can move some meetings online, that can be helpful. Also, this is the time of year to say no and to stick to it, and to remember that no is a complete sentence. You don't need any reasons why you have to say no to last minute requests. You can just say no. And you know what? You can skip the holiday parties as well. Go if it's going to be refreshing or a nice way to touch base with colleagues, but showing up at those things is rarely something that people will notice or remember. So skip those things when you can. All right, I want to talk a little bit about research and writing because, again, this is the thing that's first to go for a lot of us. And I think that staying on top of research and writing can be really helpful for setting yourself up for a productive winter break, if that's something that you want, right? For a lot of us, the winter break is just that, it's a break. But if it's not a break for you, think about how to stick to your research and writing during this crunch so that you're set up for success. My first piece of advice is to stick to the plan. If research and writing are a priority for you, keep them a priority. This will make a really big difference in sort of staying intellectually engaged with your work, right? And that can mean, here in this crunch time, learning to write in chunks. Now, this is somewhat controversial, what I'm about to say, but for a lot of us, we have a sense that this is how I write. Like, I can only write if I have a huge swath of time. It takes me 4 hours to get started writing. I need at least a full day with nothing in it if I'm going to get any writing done. So a lot of us have these stories that we tell ourselves about how we work and how we write. This crunch time is actually a good time to learn how to work differently, right? Because if we want to work differently, in a lot of ways, we're going to need, if we want to stay productive readers and writers, we're going to need to learn to write in the interstices of time. So even if you just write for 20 or 30 minutes, writing that regularly can keep you in the spirit and mood of writing, sort of really keep you going. So just carving out those minutes every day, I think, is a really good way to stay focused on what sort of matters to you in your career. So that is sort of my biggest tip there. And that might mean writing one paragraph. It might mean setting aside 20 minutes for reading in the morning. It might mean closing your office door at lunch and just, looking at your work for 10 or 15 minutes. If you're not used to that kind of writing, it can sound like something that's not going to be productive, but it's worth practicing. It's worth trying. It keeps you connected to your writing and makes it, it eases, I think, that guilt that also comes on this time of year that you're not doing enough or you should be doing something else, etc. So learning to write in chunks, I think, is the salvation for a lot of us, and it's worth practicing. And take a sip of water. 1 second. All right. My next tip is to use deadlines. Um, use deadlines to keep yourself on track. A lot of deadlines are hitting right around now because everybody wants to wrap things up before people turn off their institutional emails for the rest of the month. So if you've got deadlines, those can often be used as motivators to keep you on track with your reading and writing. So think about what's due and when. At the same time, if you really need that extra time, be willing to negotiate them. The thing that I think would help all of us in the academy is if we were more honest when we needed more time, rather than avoiding saying, hey, I need an extension. What if we just asked for it and we're clear about what we needed? It would take some of the pressure off, I think, and some of the sort of overwhelming feelings of I'm not doing enough, right? Even when it's 9 p.m., we really should be winding down, unless you're a night owl. But I think being willing to negotiate those deadlines can also give you a little space and free up some time this time of year. And then finally, as I say on the slide, give yourself some grace. Recognize that it can be really hard to stick to plans this time of year, and it's worth taking a minute and recognizing when you need to spend some time making a new plan. So give yourself grace this time of year. It's really rough for a lot of us, not only because of our workloads, but because of the emotional work that a lot of us do around the holidays. So give yourself that time and grace. All right, I wanted to end today by talking about self-care, and this is, I think, an overused word and phrase, and we're not always sure what we mean by it. But what I mean by it is thinking of ways to, again, have grace with oneself and take care of the things that we need to stay human. So this time of year can be the first thing that goes off your list. Well, the second thing. First, reading and writing fall off the plate, and then next is taking care of yourself. And I think making it a priority is really important, and it will keep you centered. Things like getting the grading done on time or prepping for class, those things, even if you don't do them really well, will still get done, right? They'll still happen. And we don't need to throw all our energy there, right? So think about where you can put your energy to take care of yourself. And what self-care means to us, to each of us, is going to vary, right? So for me, self-care means feeding myself in ways that are nourishing and exercising regularly, because that's what keeps my body and mind moving. So for me, those things are non-negotiable. They're much more non-negotiable than, say, making that committee meeting or something like that. So think about what your priorities are. For others of us, self-care means paying bills, making doctor's appointments, right? Taking a little bit of time to do those things, right? Or for my partner, cleaning the house is self-care. Organizing, feeling organized in the physical space. So if that's what you need to do, take the time to do it. A lot of work stuff, the angst about it at this time of year is worse than the work itself. So go ahead and give yourself, make taking care of what you need to take care of a priority. Next, I think it's important, kind of self-care, to prioritize your own work, especially here at the end of the semester when everything is pulling you away from what matters to you. So as I started this webinar, I'm going to end it this way as well. Remember that you don't have to get an A in everything. You don't have to be the best teacher at the end of the semester. If you are the kind of person who's watching an Ideas on Fire webinar, chances are your teaching matters a lot to you and your students matter a lot to you. And your C-level day is probably going to be one of the best classes that they have during the week. So remember that you don't have to be 100% for your students all the time, right? You don't have to be 100% at those committee meetings either, or that whatever the sort of workload is. You don't have to get an A in everything. And that's easy to say, I know, but practice makes better at this one, right? At learning to let things go that can be let go. And then finally, keep perspective. Uh, the term will end, the papers will be graded at some point, deadlines will be met or not, and it in the end is often not nearly as important as it feels at this time of the semester. So keep perspective, this will be over soon. And then I think that if you have the ability to take a actual break, like turn off the work email or look at it but don't answer it, um, pick up a fiction book that you want to read for fun and not for work, but like take an actual break from work after this semester. That can be really renewing for a lot of us. As academics, it's hard sometimes to tell when the workday is over, but we have power over that, right? Like we can declare this is the end, right? We're going to stop working. So that might be for the day, for the weekend, or for a couple of weeks after the semester. But those times of renewal and real focus on the self, I think, are really essential to not only the longevity of our careers, but also just to stay human, which is an important goal, I think, for a lot of us. Right. So we have a zillion resources at Ideas on Fire, advice, tips, suggestions for keeping ourselves together at this time of year. So I've got a couple of links here on this last slide, and the slides are available. There's a link to them on that side of your screen. But first, we've got a webinar on writing a student-centered syllabus that can save you time. And it includes a lot of suggestions that take some of the burden of teaching and grading off the teacher and put them on the students. Pedagogically sound. And once you learn to sort of let go of some of that stuff that we do as teachers, it really frees up your time and energy to focus on different things. So this might not be useful today, but as you plan your spring syllabi, I think this is a useful webinar. Next, we have a number of things about writing routines, and this is a webinar called Setting Your Writing Routine and Sticking to It, and gives some great tips for staying active as a writer, especially when we're burdened with other things. Next, here's a link to our webinar on surviving burnout, which a lot of us feel very, very intensely at the end of the year. I know that I'm definitely feeling it, and this is a good webinar with a lot of tips on how to survive that and stay on the job. And then finally, we have a list of just 10 quick self-care practices for the end of the semester that I think are really useful for right now and for getting through these last days. All right, so that's the end of our slideshow. And now I'm back. Hello. Does anybody have any advice or tips or things that they do to sort of gut it out here at the end? We've got this little box here on the side of your screen if anyone wants to chime in. All right, well, thank you all for joining us. I hope we all get through these last days, and we have some time for some rest here at the end. So thank you again, and be on the lookout for more new content from Ideas on Fire. We're always happy to have you join us. Bye-bye.